It started like any normal Saturday afternoon. My son was curled up on the couch in our own living room, watching a movie with a bowl of popcorn, just enjoying his weekend. That peace didn't last long. Out of nowhere, the front door swung open, and in walked Karen. Yes, the Karen from down the street. No knock, no invitation. She just barged in like she owned the place. I thought maybe something was wrong. Maybe she was panicking or needed help. But no. What came out of her mouth next left me speechless. She pointed at my son and said, "He needs to move. My son deserves that spot more." I honestly thought she was joking. But she stood there, arms crossed, with that entitled look on her face, waiting for my kid to get up in our own home. My son looked up, confused, and I was trying to figure out what exactly was happening. Karen didn't stop there. She went on about how her son had a tough week, how he needed to relax, and how we should be neighborly and let him use our space for a while. I kept waiting for a camera crew to pop out and say this was all a prank, but no one came. She was serious. She really believed she had the right to walk into our house and kick my son off his own couch. And when I told her to leave, she flat out refused. That's when things started to get even more uncomfortable and honestly, a little scary. I wish I could say that was the end of it, but Karen wasn't done. What she did next crossed a line no one ever should, and it all went down in front of my son. You're not going to believe how far she went to defend what she thought she was entitled to. Karen stepped further into the living room like she'd lived there her whole life. She looked around, criticizing our furniture, saying how cheap it looked and how her son would make better use of the space. I could hardly believe what I was hearing. My son sat there, frozen, unsure if he should move or wait for me to say something. He's only 12. He didn't know how to process a grown woman storming into his safe space and acting like she was in charge. I stood between her and my son and told her again, firmly, that she needed to leave. But Karen just scoffed and said, "I'm not going anywhere until justice is done." Her voice was loud enough that my neighbor across the street actually peeked through their blinds. Still, no one stepped in. That's the thing with people like her, loud, confident, and so sure they're in the right that everyone else second-guesses themselves. She started going on and on about how her son, Dylan, deserved a comfortable and stable environment and that their home was being renovated. I sympathized. Sure, but breaking into someone else's house isn't the solution. Then she pulled out her phone and started recording, saying she needed proof that we were being inhospitable and unfair. She said things like, "Look how they treat neighbors," and tried to make it sound like we were being the unreasonable ones. The entire time, Dylan was standing outside on our porch, shifting from foot to foot, clearly embarrassed. He never even tried to come inside. I don't think he even agreed with his mom. But Karen wasn't listening to anyone. Her mission wasn't about comfort anymore, was about control. And as she started pacing around our living room, talking about what she'd change if this were her home, I realized this wasn't just some bad day. Something deeper was going on. Karen kept circling the room, her eyes scanning every detail like she was judging the place for a real estate listing. She started mumbling about how our living room layout was wasted potential, and that her son would finally have the peace and quiet he needed if we just let him use it for a few hours each day. I was trying to stay calm, but inside I was boiling. Who walks into someone's home and demands that? My son kept looking at me, silently asking what we were supposed to do. I told him to stay put. Then Karen dropped something that made my stomach twist. She said she'd spoken to someone at the HOA who told her we were too isolated and had underutilized space. Now, we've never had issues with the HOA before, but I started wondering if someone had actually encouraged this behavior. Could there be a neighbor fueling Karen's sense of entitlement? That's when Dylan finally stepped in from the doorway. In a quiet voice, he said, "Mom, let's go, please." He looked so uncomfortable, like he wanted to disappear. But Karen didn't even blink. She waved him off, told him to wait outside, went back to ranting about how her family deserved support from the community. She even accused me of being selfish for not sharing my own home. The nerve. Meanwhile, I could hear my phone buzzing from the kitchen. I had posted a short update in our neighborhood app, just saying someone had entered without permission. People were reacting, some shocked, others suspiciously silent. One comment even hinted that Karen had done something like this before, something about a backyard garden dispute with another neighbor. It was clear this wasn't just about a couch or a room. This was about control, reputation, and maybe something deeper, something Karen wasn't telling anyone. And as I watched her pacing, still refusing to leave, I couldn't shake the feeling that this situation was far from over. The air in the living room felt heavier by the second. Karen was now sitting on the edge of our couch like she belonged there, flipping through one of our magazines and acting like this was some casual visit. My son had quietly moved to the far corner of the room, hugging a pillow to his chest, still unsure how to react to this bizarre standoff. I could tell he was scared, and that made everything feel 10 times worse. I wasn't just protecting our home anymore, was trying to shield him from something no kid should have to witness. Then, almost like she was daring me, Karen kicked off her shoes and propped her feet up on the coffee table. I asked her again to leave, this time with less patience in my voice. She turned to me with this icy smile and said, "Why are you making this so difficult? I'm just doing what's right for my son." I looked toward the door, where Dylan still stood with his head down, clearly wishing the floor would swallow him up. I started to walk toward the kitchen to call someone, police. HOA, anyone but Karen jumped up, blocking my path. "You don't need to do that," she said. "Let's just work this out like neighbors." Her tone had changed, sharper now, like a warning. That's when I realized she wasn't just entitled, she was determined, maybe even desperate. And that made her unpredictable. Meanwhile, the neighborhood app was lighting up. A few neighbors were now typing things like, "She's done this before." Someone mentioned a similar scene at a park picnic spot months ago, where Karen insisted another family give up their table. But this time, it was different. This was my home, my family. And she wasn't backing down as I stood frozen between the kitchen and Karen. One hand hovering over my phone, my heart pounding. I knew we were inches away from something explosive. I didn't know what was coming next, but it was clear this was about to reach a breaking point. Just as I reached for my phone to make the call, there was a loud knock at the front door. For a second, everything froze. Karen stiffened, her eyes darting toward the hallway. I assumed it was a neighbor who had seen my post and come to check in, but when I opened the door, my jaw nearly hit the floor. Standing there wasn't a neighbor. It was a man in a suit, clipboard in hand, flanked by another woman I didn't recognize. "We're here for the property inspection," he said casually. Karen stepped forward quickly, smiling like she had been expecting them. "Perfect timing," she said, brushing past me and greeting them like old friends. I had no idea what was going on. "This is the home I told you about," she added, motioning around the room as if she was the one giving the tour. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She had scheduled some sort of inspection for my house. The inspector turned to me, confused. "You're the owner?" he asked. That's when it hit me. Karen had claimed that this property was up for a temporary lease. She must have told them we were moving or subletting. I felt sick. The clipboard guy flipped through his paperwork and showed me a printed form with my address, signed illegibly, unlabeled, pending availability. She had somehow filed fake paperwork or tricked someone into thinking this was a legitimate rental situation. Karen stood beside him, arms crossed, smug as ever. "See, I told you this would clear things up, she said, with a fake sweetness. My son stood up now, wide-eyed, sensing that things were spiraling fast. Dylan looked completely overwhelmed and was quietly trying to get his mom's attention. But she ignored him. I was no longer just dealing with a rude neighbor, was staring down a potential scam inside my own home. And as I tried to explain to the inspectors what was really going on, Karen kept interrupting, spinning a web of lies that somehow sounded rehearsed. That's when I realized this wasn't spontaneous. She had been planning this for longer than any of us thought. The moment I saw my own address on that paperwork, something in me snapped. I stepped between Karen and the inspectors, took a breath, and said loud and clear, "This is my home. I didn't sign anything. I didn't agree to rent, sublet, or list this house." The inspector paused, looking between us. I could tell he was starting to realize something wasn't right. Then I asked him a simple question. "What name is on that signature?" He looked down, blinked, and mumbled something. "That wasn't mine, not even close." That's when I pulled out my phone and showed him the property records with my name on the deed. Karen's face twitched. She tried to laugh it off, saying it was all just a misunderstanding. But the woman next to the inspector wasn't buying it. She pulled him aside and whispered something. Then she looked at Karen and asked, "Do you have proof of ownership or legal agreement for this address?" Karen froze. For the first time since this all started, she didn't have a comeback, as the inspector stepped outside to make a call. Dylan finally spoke. He looked at his mom and said, "Why are you doing this? Why do you always make everything harder?" His voice cracked. Karen didn't answer. She just stared at the ground. Moments later, the inspector returned and told her that if she didn't leave immediately, authorities would be called. Karen, flustered and red-faced, grabbed her shoes without a word and stormed out. Dylan followed, but before he stepped out, he turned back and softly said, "I'm sorry." That hit harder than anything. I thought it was over. But the twist came the next morning when I found a sealed envelope slid under our door. Inside was a handwritten note, no name, just a few shaky words. "You don't know what she's running from. Please be careful." I stood there, the note in my hand, realizing that even though Karen was gone for now, something bigger might still be coming. After reading that note, didn't sleep much that night. I kept thinking about what Dylan had said and that final message, "You don't know what she's running from." It made me pause. As angry as I was, a part of me started wondering if Karen was more than just entitled. Maybe she was truly desperate, even scared. But whatever she was dealing with, it didn't make it okay to invade someone else's space, lie, or pull others into chaos. The next few days were quiet. I reported the incident to the HOA, filed a report with local authorities just to be safe, and installed a security camera near the front porch. A few neighbors reached out privately, sharing similar encounters with Karen, nothing as intense, but always uncomfortable. It turns out she had a pattern of overstepping boundaries, but no one ever thought it would escalate this far. That part made me reflect. How often do we ignore the small red flags, thinking someone's just eccentric until things spiral? As for Dylan, I haven't seen him since that day. I still think about him. That kid was caught in something far too heavy for his age. I hope wherever he is, he's okay. If anything, this whole event reminded me just how important it is to protect your space, not just physically, but emotionally. Your home should be your safe zone. Now, when I sit in that same living room with my son, there's a different kind of silence. Not tense, just aware. We've added stronger locks, sure, but more than that, we've learned to speak up faster, to trust our instincts, and to never assume someone's chaos won't find its way through your door, because sometimes it knocks, and sometimes it just walks right in.